distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Suki Beavers and I'm with the UNDP Gender Team, and it's my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you here this morning. We bid an especially warm welcome to all of the Grassroots women who have traveled to New York to participate in CSW 58. And we'd like to thank the colleagues who have agreed to do informal whisper translation for some of our colleagues. So we ask for some patience from the room if there's a little bit of noise in the background due to the whisper translation. I was saying to one of my friends yesterday that I think this is the 14th CSW that I've attended. The first few years I was here as an NGO, and for the last 8 I've been here as part of the UNDP family, and I always look forward to meeting old friends here and making new ones as we all work together to advance the gender equality agenda. We've gathered here today to continue the global dialogue with partners and stakeholders on women, gender equality, and anti-corruption, including as part of the discussions about the post-2015 development agenda. What we aim to do this morning is to probe how supporting and working with women and learning from their strategies can be adapted to build transparent and effective governance, including in the context of post-2015. We also want to hear and share about innovative strategies that have been developed by grassroots women's organizations to redress corruption. So we don't have a lot of time today. We have just over an hour. So we're going to jump right into the discussions. And we have two parts of the discussion today. The first part is a dialogue with our panelists here. I'm going to ask each of them to answer a specific question, and after they have done so, we will move into an interactive question and answer period with all of you. So I'd like to briefly introduce each of our panelists. They all have very impressive CVs, and I could spend a long time talking about them, but in deference to the time we have, I'm just going to give a quick overview of some of their accomplishments. To my immediate right is Maggie Martinez-Sullivan, who is currently UNDP's Deputy Assistant Administrator and Director ad interim of the Bureau for Development Policy. Maggie has been with the UN for 15 years, serving in Burundi, Togo, Bangladesh, Senegal, and Mexico in various capacities, and he's also led our Democratic Governance Group and also the UN Democracy Fund. Maggie is a lawyer and has served in his country, Spain, as State Secretary for Youth, Deputy Minister of the Prime Minister's Office, and as an elected member of his municipal council in his hometown. Thank you, Maggie, for joining us. Jan Peterson, to my left, probably needs no introduction to most of you in the room. She's the chair of the Huairou Commission and also a member of the International Advisory Board of UN Habitat's Global Land Tools Network and the Advisory Group on Gender Issues. She founded the National Congress of Neighborhood Women in the US to help women build partnerships across ethnic and racial lines, and she's taught at several universities. Jan has served as the Associate Director in the Office of Public Liaison during the Carter administration, and she's received many honors for her work with grassroots women, including the UN Habitat Scroll of Honor. To my right again, the Honorable Barry Gutierrez III is party representative in the Philippines. He's been a human rights advocate, public interest lawyer, and public servant before joining the 16th Congress as a representative of the Agbayan party list. Prior to his election, he served as Undersecretary in the Office of the Presidential Advisor on Political Affairs. He was a visiting fellow in the Asian Institute of Law of the National University of Singapore, director of the Institute of Human Rights at the UP Law Center, and he holds a master's degree in global public service law from New York University and 2 bachelor's degrees. Thank you very much for being with us, Barry. Francis, to my left, Gurungi Odong, is the Senior Program Officer, Governance and Human Rights Program of the Uganda Community-Based Association of Child Welfare. UCOVAC, is that right? UCOVAC is a non-governmental organization in Uganda and consortium of grassroots women-led community-based organizations working in communities to improve the welfare of women and children. UCOVAC is a member of Roots International and the Huairou Commission, a global coalition of women's organizations and a network of grassroots women's organizations. Welcome to you, Francis. And finally, last but not least, Marlene Haiti Rodriguez is president La Unión de Cooperativas Productoras in Nicaragua. Haiti has dedicated the past 25 years of her life to working with women producers. Using her knowledge and expertise in working with cooperatives, community leadership, and organizing, Ms. Rodriguez has been especially committed to the fight against the eviction of women. She's been involved in improving livelihoods of women producers, environmental sustainability, conservation of soil, and the preservation of natural resources, and building sustainable and resilient communities. Ms. Rodriguez is currently the president of the board of directors of the Union of Cooperatives Las Brumas, where she's helped 20 cooperatives with over 1,200 producers. Thank you so much for being with us. And last but certainly not least, we have with us Claudio Nardi, second secretary of the permanent mission of the Principality of Liechtenstein to the UN. Mr. Nardi has been in the diplomatic service for 3 years, serving in Vienna and in Vaduz, and he deals currently with both the second and third committees here at the UN, including on the post-2015 agenda and on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Previous to his work in the diplomatic service, he worked in the forestry industry and as a social entrepreneur in Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and Germany. Thank you so much. All right, let's jump straight into our question and answer period with our panelists. Andy, I'd like to start with you, please. There's now generally an acknowledgement that advancing gender equality and women's empowerment and fighting corruption should go hand in hand. But in reality, we still see too little happening to actually do this. In response to this gap, can you tell us a little bit about how UNDP has framed its approach and strategy to bringing these two complementary agendas together? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suki. Let my first words be of greeting to you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I realize that the comfort of the room is not sufficient for the expectation that we have today. We should have both the ECOSOC chamber be there, given the audience. Our apologies. We are victims of our success. I hope you can bear with us, Ms. Peterson, Mr. Gutierrez, and Suki. Thank you very much for the excellent introduction. To your question, I think we've had 3 levels of discussion of the issue of gender and corruption, or gender equality strategies, women empowerment strategies, and anti-corruption strategies. First, there was a bit of an absurd discussion at the very beginning that somehow tended to reproduce a strange stereotype by which we would say, well, women are less corrupt than men. And when women access public life, you can see that there is a refreshing breath of integrity arriving into public life. Absurd discussion, but based on some realities. Because indeed, the pioneering women who were opening public space were under such a pressure of public life and had to overcome such difficulties to make space in the public sphere that indeed they were clearly outstanding and not average politicians, elected officials, ministers of government, judges of courts, etc., etc. And you can expect from outstanding individuals, from a cohort of outstanding individuals, to have equally outstanding ethical and integrity levels. And that gave the false appearance that there was something biological or DNA related with integrity, which obviously we cannot affirm or deny. And we will not be able to say that until we have parity in the public sphere. We won't be able to. What we know is that in a male-dominated politics, the levels of integrity are low, and the levels of credibility of the ethics of public office holders is low, in general, and it depends on the times. So we need clearly more data on that, but I wouldn't say that we have strong evidence to sustain any equation between gender and necessarily better or worse levels of corruption. The second wave of discussion, which in my view is much more useful because it prompts a change in policy, is a response to the gender-blind approach of the anti-corruption movement and the anti-corruption strategies. The thesis went, anti-corruption is like chemical pollutants. It needs to be eradicated, but it needs to be eradicated equally for men and women. Men and women are equally victims, men and women contribute equally, and the impact is equal for men and for women, which is absolutely not true. If you look at specific sectors, as our policies are more and more about sector analysis of corruption impact, if you look at the impact of corruption in the health sector, or the impact of corruption in the education sector, or the impact of corruption in the citizen security sector, police and prisons, or the impact of corruption in the microcredit sector, you will immediately discover how engendered the impact is, and how differential it is when it affects women and when it affects men. I don't think I need to go deeper into the argument in interest of time. The third wave of discussion was therefore how to bring a more effective coordination of effort and have systematic gender analysis in our anti-corruption work and integrity analysis in our gender equality work, which is sort of the marriage and the cross-fertilization of the two types of work. At the end, the analysis that underpins is that corruption is an issue where relationships of power and of vulnerability are at play, and obviously the gender analysis helps you in establishing those relationships of power. My last point is on UNDP's approach. We are, as other UN sister agencies whose mandate is not specific on gender and gender equality, mainstreaming our work while anchoring it on self-standing outputs and objectives. We are quite strong on disaggregating analysis. We do a lot of development analytics and we try to capture data. For instance, we have looked at the UNODC database that shows that only 9 countries out of 116 listed have an anti-corruption agency headed by a woman. An interesting complete unbalance in terms of gender presence at the helm of these institutions. And we're also trying to beef up our capacity, our internal and external capacity, and I'm very glad to announce that the upcoming e-learning course titled Gender Equality, Women's Empowerment and Anti-Corruption, which has been jointly prepared by UNDP and the Huairou Commission, will be publicly available next month through the interagency web portal www.anti-corruption.org. You should see the course there on the banner. I think I have been disciplined with my time, so over to you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Jan, we'd like to turn to you now. Can you please tell us a little bit about how and why the UNDP and Huairou Commission partnership started, the focus to date, some of the challenges, successes, and lessons learned? In about 5 minutes or so. Thank you.
One is that I want to say is that the Huairou, just like our partners from UNDP, is that Huairou Commission is a global coalition of networks and started after Beijing. So I wanted to say we're at a historic moment to answer your question. We started at Huairou in Beijing, but with the idea that women from the grassroots we had to work and reverse how we're going about organizing in this world. And we really had to move from the bottom up. So we have spent the last 20 years in getting ready for the Beijing Plus 20 to look at what does it take to build an organization where you can actually have grassroots women on the ground be at the center of your work. So part of this ability to come together with UNDP is that we've been able to pull together thousands of women's groups around the world who are working in networks, who are formed networks, who are not just one-off groups. They are autonomous groups, but they have linked up with other women's groups in their countries and have formed networks and are able to bridge and work in a policy venue with an agency like UNDP. So it's not just thrusting in and parachuting in grassroots groups as it used to be within the UN community. You'd be so happy to come to a women's conference and be one grassroots woman that would say some exciting things and everybody would be so amazed. So the world has changed. So one is we're saying that the world has changed and all of our groups work on participation and governance. That's what they're doing in the countries where they are. They're trying to build democracy. They're trying to make decentralization work. They're trying to implement all these policies that people are talking about, because that's the key thing at this time. How do you actually implement this? And you need both sides of the coin. And I think that to get us to UNDP is that one is we have to be in a place to have a large mass network so that we could dialogue and work with UNDP and with UN. But we also had to have groups that were learning from each other, because our view is that for poor people, for poor women to change their way of operating, to deal with poverty, they have to see each other as the most important group they can learn from. It's not about learning from what is the policy and technical capacity of the women's movement or UNDP or UN Women if they don't see each other as they're both made to learn. And I will get to why that fits here. So I'm going to try to move very quickly, somewhat answer the question. One is that we had to do that, and we started out, the Dutch government had put out some large numbers of money on governance work to deal with the MDGs about 6 or 7 years ago. So when we met Suki, we were then reporting out on how women's groups around the world had used this money to further governance and could deal with the fact that the MDGs didn't work. Right? We all know the MDGs have had some real failing, and it certainly was failing around women. And it certainly wasn't getting to the ground. So the Dutch government tried to plug in resources to support the advancement of the MDGs. So we were reporting out here when we met, we had Suki and other people at UNDP at a meeting, and they saw that, wow, this is interesting because UNDP and its transparency and accountability work, on the other end, needs to really look at women. And I think that, and I want to just say that on a partnership point of view, Suki works in the UNDP gender unit. She did what her unit is supposed to do. This whole thing is kind of like a miracle, right? She did what her unit is supposed to do. They don't house them all the money. We forget that. But they opened up the space. She went to those wonderful people on the other side of the room, Anchor and Ida, and said, you know, we should talk. And several of us went over there and we said, I don't know. Do we want to take on transparency and accountability and corruption? Because corruption is not an easy topic to take on. You know, people can be afraid to take on corruption. And we began to, yet, on the other hand, when we began to do this work, many of our groups saw that every gain we were making was being lost for poor women on the ground because of corruption. That this was being played out, that we couldn't seriously, move ahead without taking the challenge of ourselves standing up on the ground. So part of the answer to the question is that these connections were made, we put groups together, they have been learning from each other, and on top of it, we were brought into the Transparency International Conference, and we began to see that in this movement around corruption, the whole women's voice wasn't there, and the grassroots voice wasn't there. So I think for UNDP and for us on the ground, we all had a win-win, do we call it? It's what we call the win-win partnership, but it fits with sustain, and I'll end with the SDGs. This is the right time and the right time to put these kind of partnerships together. Women care about the UN making it and surviving. We care about partnerships being put together in a way that works from the ground on up so that we get the link and we see the impact. We need each other, but we need to put it together in the way, and I think this is a model, you will see, a model of collaboration and partnership that was disappearing for a while. And certainly it wasn't engaging with grassroots women on the ground. So this And this is what I want to say, and that makes it sustainable. So getting ready for the SDGs, these are the kinds of things we hope we will grow in learning and building, that the UNDP will be able to take this within the field in its work, but we can help other parts of the partnerships within the UN learn from what we're doing. So
Thank you so much, Jim. Barry, turning to you now. Governments, civil society, and a wide range of development partners are currently focused on thinking about what the post-2015 development agenda should look like. And the importance of advancing gender equality and women's empowerment, as well as the centrality of democracy and governance to guarantee that development is achieved through promoting transparency and meaningful participation and accountability are all key aspects of this post-2015 discussion. How can national governments work together with women's organizations to advance these two important goals in the 2015 agenda and beyond?
Thank you, Suki. And good morning to everyone. Well, I'll try to answer the question from my own somewhat peculiar experience of having been a person who worked with grassroots organizations for more than 15 years, who now finds himself within the confines of the national government. But, okay, so to go straight to answer the question. On the part of government, I think there are at least 3 interventions that have to be pursued here on this point. The first is an institutionalization of trying to come up with laws or policies that will make it mandatory for consultations and participation to be actually pushed for at the national government level. It might seem to be a given, given the current environment and the current context prevailing not just in many national governments all over the world, but also in international organizations. But it wasn't always so. And in many parts of the world, including my own country, it's still a struggle to actually talk about trying to institutionalize mechanisms to actually allow for accountability or participation or transparency. Right now, for example, to give a concrete case, we are still very much in the thick of the fight to pursue legislation which institutionalizes freedom of information. It's a principle already found under various international conventions that we have signed on to. It's also found in our own constitution. But in the last 30 years, we have found that, particularly for women at the grassroots, it's very, very difficult to get that principle implemented. When you start talking to an actual national government agency, when you start talking to your local government, there is a bureaucratic tendency to concede or to deny information. It's not necessarily a case of a malicious intent or any hidden agenda. It's just the way that the bureaucracy works. So what we're trying to do right now is to create a different kind of policy. To create a policy which favors information. And let me tell you, it's not that easy. Our own president, who anchored his, our current president, who anchored his campaign on a platform of transparency, on a platform of accountability, was very, very supportive of this when he was running. But once he actually sat on, he became president, his support became lukewarm. I suppose something to do with being in the national government. So that's an example. We have to put the laws and policies in place at the national level to actually provide for the tools that grassroots women, grassroots-based organizations can actually utilize in order to engage the national government at this level. A second initiative would be to encourage national government to actually actively engage at the grassroots. When you talk about national government, my experience has been there is a marked tendency to look at, for want of a better term, the bigger picture. In other words, if you're talking about anti-corruption, for example, you will tend to focus on strengthening a national level anti-corruption agency, rather than looking to the grassroots and engaging grassroots organizations in favor of that initiative. And there has to be a conscious effort to encourage government to look to the grassroots, to go outside of the normal bureaucratic comfort zone where you deal with, I suppose, big national level concerns and look to communities for solutions. Right now, one of the things that we are attempting to implement in the Philippines is something we call bottom-up budgeting. This has to do with the way that the national budget is actually decided and developed. Under our constitution, it's Congress which does that, and theoretically, members of Congress, including myself, are mandated to do the consultations themselves. But in practice, that has not actually been happening. So, in order to address that particular gap, we have a specific policy now being implemented by the executive, where the budgeting process will involve community-based organizations working with their local governments, and that feeds into the process of crafting the budget at the national level. A third, of course, will have to be funding. My experience has been that the things governments are really serious about are the things that they put money in. And that's really the best indicator if you're serious or not. You know, if it's going to be all talk, it's going to be all policy, and there is going to be no or very, very little budgetary support, then it's not going to be as effective as it could be. In the Philippines, we have a policy for what we call the gender and development budget, which it's required at all levels of government, from the national to the local, to allocate at least 5% of their total agency or local government budget for gender and development programs. It's a good policy in theory, but again, it's not working. So again, there has to be a follow-up on that. But I cannot overemphasize the importance of actually putting the national government's money where its mouth is. Just one last point here. While it's well and good to ask or to encourage national governments to undertake these particular initiatives, again, at the end of the day, the grassroots organizations themselves, grassroots women, will have to assert, will have to take advantage of the space. And I've seen this in practice. When we were pushing very aggressively for the enactment of a reproductive health law in the Philippines, and just to give you a context, it's very, very difficult to enact that law in the Philippines. Why? Because of the very, very strong political influence of the Roman Catholic Church, which really threw its entire weight against the enactment of this law. Why did it succeed? Because at the end of the day, it wasn't the politicians, it wasn't NGOs, it wasn't supportive people in the executive. It was grassroots women's organizations going to Congress, knocking on the doors of their local representatives, getting their voices heard in the national media, conducting demonstrations and mass actions. And at the end of the day, that was the crucial intervention that took us over the line, despite the massive opposition of the church to this particular initiative. So I cannot, again, overemphasize the importance of asserting the space. We can push for the policies to be there. We can push for the consultations to happen. We can push for a change in the way that national government officials will view the participation of communities and grassroots women. But at the end of the day, that assertion has to be done. That space has to be taken advantage of. So let me end on that note, and thank you very much.
I can anticipate some comments and questions coming following that. Thank you. Francis, we'll turn to you now. Building on your experience at the grassroots level, can you please tell us a little bit about the Transparency and Accountability Initiative and the perspective that it helped to bring to the fight against corruption at the local as well as global levels? And how do you see this work feeding into the 2015 agenda or contributing to it?
Thank you all for coming. Good morning. Just to respond quickly to this question for the time, through the Huairou Commission and through the UNDP, the Transparency and Accountability Initiative, we had 6 grassroots organizations that participated in the Transparency and Accountability Initiative. And these groups have, came from different countries, from Nepal, from Uganda, where I come from Brazil, from Nicaragua, from Nepal, and these grassroots Philippines and so on. These grassroots organizations organized themselves to put in place, to design strategies at grassroots level in order to bring, to fight corruption, but also to promote democratic governance in their countries. And through these initiatives, we had 179 grassroots women mobilized to lead these projects in the different countries. Like John has said, the 6 groups did not work in isolation, but mobilized other grassroots groups at grassroots level to be able to reduce corruption and also to promote democratic governance. And through this process, we have had 2,338 community members who have been engaged and have been impacted across these different regions. And basically, to speak on behalf of all these groups, we had a strategic approach that we used at grassroots level that was supported by the Huairou Commission and the UNDP the Transparency and Accountability Initiative. Basically, the grassroots groups organized. They did not work in isolation. Grassroots groups organized other grassroots organizations in their communities, and there was a lot of investment in capacity building for the grassroots groups to be able to get into this space and be able to promote transparency and accountability in different sectors of health, education, land, documentation. So there were different issues that were priority to grassroots women that grassroots groups organized around and tried to ensure that there is transparency and accountability in service delivery in these specific sectors. So basically what happened is that the grassroots organizations decided that grassroots women needed to go beyond just reporting, because that is being the order of the day, where grassroots women are only allowed or given space to report that this is what is happening. But what grassroots organizations have done is that we have organized to make sure that we go beyond reporting and try to create partnerships or try to create linkages that can be able to bring grassroots women's leadership and organizing to promote transparency and accountability. So what we did, or what grassroots groups have done, is that we have developed grassroots women-led initiatives in our communities, where we have created awareness amongst community members on issues related to corruption. We have also created very strategic linkages and partnerships with local leaders. And this is basically just to go beyond confrontation, which is the order of the day, and be able to work towards cooperation and partnership as a way to bring about transparency and accountability, and at the end of the day to improve service delivery. So basically what has happened at grassroots level is that there has been a lot of organizing, there has been a lot of work done in the area of monitoring local budgets, in the areas of health. There has been a lot of work done in the area of trying to improve service delivery in land titling, in provision of water and sanitation in the different groups. And basically, all this organizing at grassroots level is aimed at influencing policy at national level. So even if grassroots groups are organizing at grassroots level and creating networks and constituencies at grassroots level, we are looking at upscaling, we are looking at creating linkages at global level, at national level, to be able to work together to fight corruption and to bring about transparency and accountability. So basically our initiatives have been aimed at, first and foremost, like I said, to promote service delivery. We are not only looking at fighting corruption, but going beyond that, because at the end of the day, it's the life of the woman. The woman the grassroots woman is trying to be part of this space so that she can be able to receive services as she is supposed to receive them, or as the child is supposed to receive them in the community. So we are trying to make sure that there is improved service delivery at community level. So all our initiatives are really aiming at service delivery improvement. But again, we are not only looking at confrontation. At times it's important to be confrontational when things are not moving, but we are saying at grassroots level that we need to also create linkages, we need to create partnerships with our local leaders to be able to bring about transparency and accountability and to improve service delivery. So we have initiatives at local level where we're having local dialogue sessions where we meet with our local leaders, we negotiate and try to bring them on board so that we can work together to be able to promote transparency and accountability in our communities. And basically all of this we have seen changes in governance in our communities. We are seeing more transparency, more accountability to the grassroots women, and this is transforming the traditional power dynamics in our communities, where it's not the local leaders that are telling us what to do. But we are sitting on the table and trying to tell them that this is how we want things to be done. This is what we want as grassroots people, so that they can respond to our priorities other than changing the power where the leaders have been telling us what should be done, and in the process we have seen that this has kind of increased corruption in service delivery at community level. So what we are saying at grassroots level to end this is that we want these practices that we have done to be upscaled, because we see this as something that is working. It is working with very limited resources. Women are organizing. With very little support, women are organizing, women are mobilizing, women are creating very strong partnerships at local level, and we are saying that this has worked. It has proven to be something that is working. Therefore, we want these practices to be upscaled. We want these practices to be transferred. And this can be done with the support at global level. We want to come to the global level, to this space, and not to be looked at as recipients of the strategies that have been developed at global level, but we want to be partners in developing strategies that can create change at community level. So this is what we are saying. We want to come to the global stage, not as recipients, but as partners. We want our approaches to be seen as approaches that work, approaches that are sustainable, and approaches that have proven to be effective in our communities. So that is what our message is, looking at the post-2015 agenda.
Thank you so much, Francis. I think we should try to get a tape recording of that and send it out to our colleagues who are in the midst of discussion.
We have.
Thank you. We will turn now to Ms. Rodriguez. Building on your experience of organizing more than 20 women-led cooperatives with more than 1,200 local farmers, why is including women in the fight against corruption so important in your context? And can you please share with us not only your experience, but also your analysis of the difference that this has made to have women as part of the struggle? Thank you.
Buenos días a todas y todos. Good morning to everyone. Quiero compartir el trabajo que nosotros como mujeres de base hemos venido haciendo en nuestras comunidades y el departamento de Jinotega, Nicaragua.
I want to share the work we have been doing as Grassroots Women in the department of Jinotega in Nicaragua.
Creo que desde la experiencia de nosotros como organización podemos decir que hemos trabajado para que todas nosotras conozcamos nuestros deberes y derechos. Por ahí tenemos que comenzar.
As a grassroots organization, as women being organized, we have worked hard so that every woman in our country or in our community knows about their rights and what we are able to demand.
El acceso a la información pública ha sido muy importante, la fiscalización de las acciones que realiza el Estado.
So it has been very important to have the access to the budgets, talking about transparency, having the access to the budgets, the government budgets, and also being able to be like guardians of the government's actions.
A través de los conocimientos adquiridos en las capacitaciones, las mujeres las estamos como encaminando a que participen en la rendición de cuentas que hacen los gobiernos que se llaman cabildos.
So all the knowledge acquired during the training the women have had, we are building their capacities to be able to make local advocacy and participate in the accountability processes in our government.
El conocer las leyes es muy importante porque sabemos dónde vamos a ir y qué vamos a hacer, cuáles son nuestras propuestas que nosotros vamos a proponer, y para eso lo vemos en estos mismos cabildos donde nosotras participamos porque la ley 40 nos faculta.
So being able to know the laws and the policies that permit us participate in these processes is very important, because if we don't know the laws, we don't know how we can work on these things. And there's a law number 40 law in Nicaragua that allows us to participate in this advocacy or lobbying meetings in which governments work in their accountability.
No podemos hablar nosotros así por hablar si no conocemos los presupuestos que tiene cada gobierno en cada municipio.
In order for us to work and to talk about budgets, we have to know the budgets. We cannot just demand the money if we don't know where the budgets are allocated.
¿Y cómo nosotros hicimos para conocerlo? Venimos trabajando de Comisión Huairou, nosotros venimos trabajando el tema de la gobernanza con los ODM. Y así hemos venido capacitando, hemos venido negociando con los gobiernos locales para buscar espacios de las mujeres de base de esa estructura.
So we have been working for a lot of time now with Huairou Commission and the MDGs, where we started working on governance, and this has allowed us to be able to build capacities in our women to become part of these processes.
No ha sido fácil, pero tenemos el día de hoy 34 mujeres en espacios de gobierno.
It hasn't been easy, but by today we have 34 women now in political spaces and in making decision positions.
Tenemos estructuras, por ejemplo, con esta iniciativa, son 30 mujeres en 3 grupos focales, que son las que apoyan toda la ejecución, son las que hacen la fiscalización en la base cómo se ejecutan estos presupuestos.
And with this initiative, we were able to build the capacities in 30 women that now form 3 different focal groups that are the ones responsible for doing the follow-up of the actions of the government and verify how the money is being used and if it is being used correctly and in what they said they were going to use it for.
La capacitación ha sido muy importante, por ejemplo, para conocer la ley de participación ciudadana, que era uno de los problemas que estaba afectando los documentos de identidad.
So training was very important because through training we got to know this law that permits us to access to our ID documents and birth certificates, because that was one of the worst problems in Nicaragua.
La Unión de Cooperativas Las Brumas no trabaja solamente este tema, trabajamos de manera integral y esto nos ha servido también para lograr fortalecer todo el trabajo que venimos haciendo en la resiliencia comunitaria y en...
So my organization does not only work in this, but being able to work in this initiative has helped us strengthen all of the work we do and to even link us with community resilience.
Otra cosa importante es el haber capacitado una red de defensoras judiciales, que eso también permite que tengan un enlace entre el juzgado local y sus comunidades.
And through this initiative, we also built a network of judicial defendants, women judicial defendants that are able to accompany women in their legal processes and have a direct association with the local Justice Department.
Pero claro, solamente hemos iniciado el primer año de capacitación y se necesita continuar con este proceso.
But of course, we're just in the beginning of this process. We need to continue in order to get the results we are expecting to.
A través de las mujeres que tenemos en los espacios, hemos logrado que nuestras prácticas se conviertan en políticas públicas en las municipalidades.
Through the training of women and the spaces we have been able to gain, we have even got our practices as grassroots women to get to political, to policies, national policies at a national and local level.
Cuando las mujeres conocemos nuestros deberes, nuestros derechos, podemos hacer diálogo con los gobiernos y crear alianzas. Todavía no podemos decir que estamos en totalidad, pero vamos en proceso ahora.
When women are able to know their rights and their legal duties, we are able to negotiate, to build local advocacy with our governments, and this is very important. So we are not where we wish we were, but we are walking there.
Entonces, si estamos fortalecidas, en cuanto a la producción, en cuanto a la seguridad alimentaria. Entonces hay que seguir trabajando para que haya verdaderos objetivos de desarrollo sostenible.
So if we're working in anti-corruption and transparency in production, in food security, there are other things we need to keep doing so that we can obtain the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much.
And thank you to all of our panelists. We're now going to move to the interactive portion of the event today. I would encourage you to share experiences and also ask specific questions to any of our panelists. But as I know that there will be a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of desire to participate, can I please request that you keep your questions or interventions fairly short? I will take several rounds. We will do maybe 3 or 4 at a time, and then we'll go to the next round. And I would be pleased to start here, the second here, third here, and fourth here for our first round. Thank you.
Oh, hi, my name is Amanda. I'm from the Sustain Youth Delegation. Thank you all for coming and talking. This has been very inspirational. But my question is that it's popularly known that there's corruption within the government, but it's not as popularly within the feminist movement for gender equality. What I mean is that often the women we see portrayed at the front lines are either fortuitous enough to be opulent or privileged, so they work for their own class mobility. Too often I've seen people advocating for higher tools in the universities when in certain regions it's not even primary schools, and others who advocate for higher wages in the high-paying business jobs when there's over 15 million slaves working for close to nothing. And my question is, how can we end this most subtle but pernicious form of corruption within our own ranks and make sure that the movement is not for the benefit of the few, but the benefit for all?
Thank you for that intimidating and fantastic. We'll move to our second question, please.
I was wondering if UNDP has considered that corporate funding of political parties prior to the election is also a form of corruption because the political party members or the senators are beholden to the corporations after. And I think it must puzzle grassroots women to hear that when someone is opposed to giving money before, that's called funding, but when it's in other countries, particularly developing countries, when they're given money after, it's called corruption, but it's not called corruption before.
Thank you. And our third question, please, for round one.
Thank you. I'm from UN Women in Tanzania. We're working closely with UNDP and our partners. Some of our partners are here today. But we're working on this very clearly linked to gender responsive budgeting at national and local level, working with the government institutions that are engaging at policy, but very much at the grassroots level. One, I don't want to repeat what's being said here because they're similar initiatives, but one additional entry point that we have, which is based on previous work with the Women Judges Association in Tanzania, is a focus on women's rights, and a particular dimension that relates to corruption, which is sexual extortion, where sometimes the poorest of the poor, women and girls, have to pay with sex. And the terrible implications of this, and having this recognized as a form of corruption, because it is so endemic, and addressing this. So there's a lot of awareness raising around that too, as a core of women's rights. Because as we were reminded by the director of the UNDP, this is that power that's at play here, and this is the worst form of it. So a question then to the panel. I mean, we're concerned with service delivery. We're concerned with development, but we're also concerned with human rights and women's rights. Can you share with us some examples of how you've engaged with media around this? We are doing that to a certain extent, but I would like to hear any examples of where media has been involved, especially when it relates to attitude and behavior. Thank you.
And our fourth intervention here, the microphone being
My name is Mary. I represent Catholic women in Zambia on the WUCO board. WUCO is World Union of Catholic Women Organization. What I'd like to say is to encourage UNDP and other bodies to include faith-based NGOs in their work. UNDP in Zambia funded women in leadership and decision-making positions, and we were surprised at the results. A lot of women who would otherwise not even venture in anything to do with politics or leadership suddenly changed their mind and they were part of that. And the Catholic Women Organization interacts with the women of other faiths. We have done demonstrations on a lot of issues with Muslim women. So it's an organization that works with anybody of faith, and if they are ignored, you find that a large number of women will be ignored because they are specific in what they will embrace.
Thank you very much. May I ask the panel who would like to start in the responses? Would like to volunteer? Thank you,
Thank you, Suki. Two or three quick comments on what Amanda. Yes, what Amanda said. In my experience or in my knowledge of the feminist movement, one of its most pristine characteristics is that it is a convergence between working women, grassroots women, and elite women. And it is one of these movements where the few have almost systematically worked for the men. You can't say that of other movements that have had very laudable causes at their heart, but where the elite capture has remained as such. I think that the feminist movement has remained very generous in terms of understanding that it is for the many that you have to open up rights. On the issue of when you were saying that there's a sort of hypocrisy of defining something as corruption when it happens after the fact, while we define it as political funding when it happens before the fact. I was yesterday in a very interesting meeting with the Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund, and she was saying, Kate Gilmore, and she was saying that we define as conjugal and marital duties after a cleansing ceremony of child marriage, what we would define as pedophilia if it happened just before child marriage. So it is true that the same reality suddenly gets somehow purified by a formula that we invent, and after the fact, one thing is deemed acceptable by our norms, while before the fact we would consider it, well, passible of going to jail. I do believe that in particular in the United States, one of the problems with democracy has to do with corporate funding of politicians. And the own Americans who discuss the difficulties of their democracy so point to it. My last comment is on what my sister from Women in Tanzania was just mentioning. We tend to believe that extortion for sexual favors is very concentrated around justice and security sector reform. As a matter of fact, it is appalling in the education sector, for instance, where the relationship of power between the teacher or schoolmaster and the girl at school is even more accentuated or exacerbated. Surprisingly, in the health sector, where attention is oftentimes traded against sexual favors, against sexual coercion. And it is, as you are saying with your body language across the board, it is something that corruption, one of the elements of engendered corruption is to is to demand sexual favors against normal services that are due. and I think that is one of the turns of the strategies. I think that my colleague will be able to give very good examples of how we have worked with media on this. One of the examples that I like personally is the work that is being done by some celebrities around stereotypical roles in soap operas and in movies and so on. I think it is extremely important that young girls see role models also on the big screen and on the small screen, and that's a very interesting take of our goodwill ambassadors and better advocates have taken up, but I think it will be commented. Thank you.
Francis and then Jen.
I just want to pick on that conversation that we're having. The grassroots groups participated in a research that was supported by UNDP, the PACT program, Transparency and Accountability program, like I said before. And during this research, the grassroots women talked to their fellow grassroots women in the community and asked them how they defined corruption. And one of the findings was that, like he just said, that many women were saying, because corruption many times is seen as exchange of money. But for us, we are poor women, we don't have money. And the people that provide us services know that we don't have money. So when we go, they actually ask us, they tell us, if you don't have money, you know what to do. That means you give me sex, I give you medicine. You give me sex, I give you a land title. So what we are doing as grassroots, based on that research that we did, what we are doing as grassroots women is that we are coming up with strategies that can be able to curb such tendencies. For instance, I'll give an example of one of the groups in Kenya, the Slum Women Initiative for Development. What they do is that they are working around trying to improve service delivery in the area of land titling. So what they do as grassroots women is that they are doing this collectively. They are doing this as a group. They go into an office as a group of women. And in that way, it kind of reduces reduces the possibility of one woman doing this alone, and therefore it's just two people in the room, this gentleman that provides the service and this woman, and therefore they can have, they can be exploited in that way. But the strategy that they are using, we have seen that it is very powerful. They are, getting this service as a group, collectively as a group, going to an office as a group, then it becomes very difficult for that negotiation, the sexual negotiation to go through. So that's just an example of one of the strategies that we are using at grassroots level to work collectively. Another thing that I want to talk about is working with the media. Many of our groups at grassroots level are also working very strongly with the media. We did not have very many experiences, but if you hear from many of the groups that participated in this program, many of the groups are working with the local radio stations. So basically, we go to the radio stations, get some space and talk about these issues. After the monitoring of the budgets, we go to the radio stations and talk about the issues that are happening. If facilities are not being provided to the health center, if the medical personnel are not coming to the health center, we use this space to raise awareness and to mobilize people to understand the situation that is happening in the community, and therefore have motivation for people to come into this movement that is trying to promote transparency and accountability. Mobile phones have also been a very powerful tool that has been used in the community within our groups, where at least there's been an extensive use of mobile phones in our community. So we do use the texting process where we try to mobilize using the text messages and also pass on information using the text messages. But again, like I said, we need to upscale. This is something that we have been doing for some time with limited resources, and this is the support that we need to expand some of these strategies.
I was just going to take, just taking on the comment of the church. Almost all the women within that we work with are very faith-based. They come from they're very religious and are a part of many different churches, and I think that goes partially to your question, is that on one hand, yes, the women's movement is open. I come from that strong tradition. But on the other hand, and we've only been organizing really globally since about 1975, if we started Mexico City. So about the last 40 years, women around the world have taken on leadership globally and are building institutions and building networks and organizations. But there is a disconnect between women working on the ground and a lot of the women that are within the women's movement. And that's true for most national governments too, so it's not just about the women's movement, and that leaves a very complicated problem, which goes to this anti-corruption, because people are moving for policies here, advocating for policies, but they're disconnected from the people that are implementing on the ground. And both of these groups need to reaffirm, realign, and that means that there's a different culture, different ideas and priorities and what they're doing and how they're doing it. That doesn't often come together. And that leads into your very brilliant statement that you're putting out, because I do think we have to challenge each other in a way that often doesn't happen because we all get too polite and too nice. Like, for example, we have many prayers in religion. I mean, we had a conference in Camden, New Jersey once where we had women ministers that were opening up a land conference, and a lot of our more feminist friends who are not so religious thought, oh my God, what are we in? They were ready to get on an airplane and fly back to California, but they couldn't leave because there wasn't any airport close by. So I'm saying is that when you put, and we're at that point, because of the SDGs, we're at that point now that new partnerships, new voices, and we have to realign, because if you don't have a constituency, the women's movement needs a constituency on the ground, UN needs a constituency on the ground, we are that constituency on the ground. That means there's new negotiations and new dialogue, but we can improve the implementation and really build and look at how we're doing it in a way that's not corrupt.
Barry and Haiti, would you like to make comments now, or would you like to wait for the second? Please go.
Just a short comment on the media strategy, because I already talked about this briefly earlier. From our experience, particularly on the issue of reproductive health, which I mentioned earlier, one of the key strategies that we actually adopted in relation to dealing with the media and getting the message across to media was taking the, how should I put it, the principles at the global level. When you talk about women's rights, for example, or human rights, and trying to translate them or put them in a context that would resound better with women at the grassroots. Because one of the particular problems we had to confront was that the opponents to reproductive health legislation in our context tried to paint the entire idea of women's rights and reproductive health rights as a foreign imposition. It was something that was against our culture. That was the UN interfering with what we should be determining for ourselves. So the key to that was you've got grassroots women at the forefront of the media engagement, talking about what reproductive health would do for their communities, talking about how these particular policies would actually redound to the benefit of their daily struggles within their own context. And that proved successful. It took the entire debate from that level to the level of real concerns being articulated by actual people in poor communities, as opposed to just being a debate between one segment of the international community as against, let's say, a national elite.
Haiti, would you like to comment now, or would you like to wait? We'll take maybe one or two more questions.
She wants to.
Sure. All right, we have very limited time. We have time for probably two more questions, so I'm going to take one from both sides of the room. Let's start over here, and then we'll finish over here.
Hi, I'm a junior member from Be Women from Ecuador, and in my school we wanted to start a program to fight against anti-corruption, and we didn't know where to start. And we had the future in our hands because we were working with young people. And when we started talking with them, we noticed that they didn't know about what corruption was, what exactly what they do, what was wrong, what was right. So, it's more than a comment than a question, but don't you think that it would be more viable to start with education? Because in the end, we start to trying the problem from the root and not when the either has already started. Thank you.
Well, one of the things that I find is a recurring element is the implementation. Sometimes you have great laws and you have great budgets and then they're not used and the laws are not implemented. So my question is, how can you ensure, because even in our organizations here in New York, you have a percentage every year for training and in the field as well, and it was a big fight to get it, and then it's not used. So my question is, how can you enforce that the percentages for training and gender of the budgets at government and organizational level be actually, where's the accountability? How can people that are responsible to spend those budgets and do not spend it, how can they become accountable? And of course, the implementation of the rules is part of the accountability. They have terms of reference in their post, and how they're evaluated against those actions and tests that they haven't carried on. Most important, these percentages are what we need.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to the panel, I'd just like to open the space. Are there any of the other grassroots women in the room that have been engaged in this initiative, or others directly working on anti-corruption in their communities, that would like to share a particularly important piece of learning or pose a question to the panel? Any grassroots women that are here?
Are you hiding?
Going once.
It's working.
Hello?
Yeah.
Take that.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity. I'm Joyce Rosemary Nanguli from Salaam Women Initiative for Development, Uganda. In fact, my colleague Francis was here trying to tell around what we are really doing in empowering that there is accountability and transparency in the land sector. Salaam Women Initiative empowers women access land and housing. But we have really realized that there is a lot of corruption in the land sector. Even in our country, the government saw that there was too much corruption in the land sector, and they had to put halt on all land transactions until all the titles were computerized or digitized. So, to us as grassroots women, it was really challenging. Just getting a document which is very important to be in your file before you are recommended for titling, that is a deed print. It was really very difficult to get. We applied in February year 2012, and until last month that we were able to receive those deed prints. So you can see, after we were supported by UNDP through Huairou Commission, that's when we were able to push this agenda collectively. So as grassroots, we are really facing a number of challenges when we seek for service delivery from our respective institutions that are dealing with different sectors. SWIT has really pushed the agenda of getting titles, but currently we have enabled 37 women to get land titles this hold, and 120 are in the process of processing titling. But this has been done because we have partnered with different people from different institutions. And in this room, we have our government representative who is in charge of the area land committee, who has really played a key role in seeing that grassroots women get land titles. You can just wave, maybe. So we really appreciate UNDP and Huairou Commission for supporting us, and we are here to if we really strengthen the relationship, then we know that very many people, particularly those at the grassroots level, will be able to acquire a land title. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with Haiti, and then I'll turn to any other panel members who would like to make a quick response, and then we'll move to Claudio, who's summing up our event. Please, Haiti.
Sí, quiero dar un aporte en cuanto a las dos preguntas que se hicieron de último a la compañera del Ecuador y a la sobre los presupuestos.
So she wants to answer both of the questions that were asked, the girl from Ecuador and the other person of the budget.
Creo que usted está diciendo la verdad en cuanto hay que iniciar por la raíz para que no nos pase lo que nos había pasado a nosotros, que no conocíamos qué era lo que íbamos a hacer, y con esta iniciativa logramos hacerlo.
She thinks you are speaking the truth when you say that you have to attack the problems from the root, so that the history doesn't repeat, and you don't have to face a problem like they are doing right now, but that through this initiative they are trying.
Para este año tenemos ya iniciado una capacitación sobre un instituto donde hay jóvenes para que conozcan lo que es, qué significa la corrupción y a dónde, todos los pasos pues, de la corrupción. Tenemos el folleto aprobado por la excelentísima Corte Suprema de Justicia con los aportes de las mujeres de base.
So she is actually sharing that one part of the initiative is that they are going to work this year with an institute of young people, and they have developed a manual, a handbook that was approved by the Supreme Justice Court, and that they will work with these young people and young men and women so that they can learn what is corruption and what is good and what is bad.
¿Quiénes nos van a dar la capacitación? Nosotras en coordinación con el juzgado local.
And the training will be done by the Grassroots Women and also the local judges.
Esperamos, ¿verdad?, que sigan los aportes para la Comisión Huairou, porque si no va a ser difícil.
So we really hope to have more financing for Huairou Commission so that we can keep on with this experiences.
La otra pregunta sobre los presupuestos, que cómo hacemos para saber si se cumple o no se cumple.
So answering the question about budgets and to know whether if the budgets are really being applied to what they were supposed to.
Las que negocian y están dentro de conocer esos presupuestos y nos los llevan a la base también en las reuniones son las mujeres que tenemos en los espacios de las estructuras de gobierno.
So the key is to have women inside of the government that can be able to see those budgets and handle them. So because that was their strategy, they placed women in decision-making positions in which they had access to the budget and they got the information for them.
Ahora, para nosotros saber si se cumple, antes de iniciar el trabajo con este presupuesto, hay consultas en la base para ver cuáles son las necesidades y ese es nuestro trabajo.
So in order to see if they're correctly implemented, what they do is perform consultations at the grassroots level in the communities to see if their necessities are really being fulfilled.
Nos facilita también que tenemos mujeres, por ejemplo, que trabajan en la Comisión de Gobernanza, que está aquí una, ¿verdad?, que también es de un espacio local y esa también retroalimenta a las comunidades y así, por ejemplo, si un presupuesto viene determinado porcentaje para diferente actividad, en los cabildos, que es la rendición de cuentas, ahí sabemos, pero ¿qué es nuestro trabajo? Que toda la población llegue a esos cabildos.
So it is also very important for us that they have women representatives from the Commission of Governance, that actually one of their elected women is here. And so she feeds back the information about budgets, and what they have to see is that if a budget has a specific percentage for something, the importance is for the women to go to these accountability meetings and listen what the government is saying they are using the money for. And if they know what it was supposed to be used for, they know if they are not doing it correctly.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we are being pressured to vacate the room because the next event will start. But I would like to now turn the floor over to Claudio, who has the difficult task of trying to pull together the rich discussions.
Can everybody just sit for a second?
Just for a
relax?
second. Don't worry. We can be late by 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Please consider the floor. As you mentioned, it's a monumental task to wrap up.
Yes, we will try to put it online in our work portal, the anti-corruption.org, anti-corruption.
For me, at the first glance, the fight against corruption seemed gender neutral. So thank you for giving me this new perspective on the gender aspect of corruption. And also in the multilateral discourse, we have focused until now only on the financial impacts and the development cost of corruption, rather than the integrity or the gender aspect of it. So this event has proven to me that women have a positive impact on the fight against corruption in general. So in bringing the women's voice to the anti-corruption discourse and making the case for urgent need to integrate a gender-sensitive approach to it is crucial. It is also evident that the promotion of meaningful participation and accountability must be implemented in future discussions about anti-corruption. I wish to thank the Grassroots Women for the rich and varied inputs on the discussions. It's just incredible how manifold you address this very important issue. It's on partnerships, policy initiatives, budget, health, lands, documented issues, telecommunication, education, budgeting, so it's extremely varied. We didn't really talk much about the e-course. I wish to congratulate you for this, and I really hope to look into it, and hopefully, as well as the manifold initiatives by the Grassroots Women the report will be scaled up. So, 2 more minutes, the way forward. So I wish to highlight 3 points. First is the UNDP convention. We didn't really talk about it. So it has a lot of positive attributes. It's a technical and mutual legal assistance, international cooperation, as well as a strong review mechanism, which also highlighted. Therefore, we call on member states for universal membership. So this is really important to fight corruption. So also the definition used delegate mentioned it that we are only focusing on the big scale corruption. This year in this very room we worked at the 68th General Assembly negotiating the third committee resolution against corruption, and we managed to condemn corruption not only in all forms, but also at all levels. So this gives us opportunity to focus on the effects of corruption for millions of people. So this wasn't really the case in the first place. 1 more minute on the post-2015.
I don't think so.
1 minute, okay. It took me 2 months to understand it. Just one important point I wish to commend the co-facilitators of the OWG, Sustainable Development Goals, on the inclusive approach to it. They really opened the discussion also for civil society, and I urge you on the 31st of March participate if you can and bring this new aspect into discussion, because now in the focus area corruption is only reflected in focus area 19, and we should try to
Thank you. On behalf of UNDP and the Huairou Commission, thank you to the panelists and to all of you.